We'd like to thank all those who sponsored the drasha for this week. Naomi and Ori Carmel, in memory of Naomi's father, Zisa ben Baruch, whose yortzeit is Tuesday. Neshama should have an aliyah. Debbie and Mark Katz, to commemorate the yortzeit of Mark's mother, Chana Pesel bas David, Zichron Levracha. Neshama should have an aliyah. And the Wakshlag family, to commemorate the second yortzeit, their beloved mother and grandmother, Mrs. Sheva Wakshlag, Alea Shalom, Maras Sheva Bas Rav Yitzchak Elimelech. Neshama should have an aliyah. All these neshama should have aliyos, and thank you very much to all those who sponsored. There's a very perplexing section of psukim in this week's parsha. When you think of all the lofty things in the Torah that are only alluded to in a brief manner, it's very difficult to understand the section involving the digging of the wells by Yitzchak. In this week's parsha, we're told that there had been wells that Avram had dug, and in jealousy of Yitzchak, the Plishtim filled them up and drove Yitzchak away. Then Yitzchak returned and dug different wells and succeeded in getting water from these wells. And it tells us what he named the wells. The first two wells had involved a lot of discord. The first two wells had involved a tremendous amount of discord with his neighbors, and so he gave the wells names that reflected Asek, Sitna, that reflected the challenges of those wells. And then the third well, nobody bothered him with, and he named the well Rechovos. Rechovos is a language of breadth, that God had widened things for him, and he found himself succeeding now. Why are these wells important? Why is it important to know in detail what his relationships were with his neighbors about these wells? Why is it important to know what he named these wells? This is a topic that many Mefarshim grapple with in one way or another. In the Parsha group, we discussed the Ramban this week. Without going into detail now, the Ramban has a very interesting pshat that he says the digging of these wells alludes to ultimately the three Batei Mikdash, the three temples, and the circumstances that would surround them. It's a very interesting Ramban. I heard years ago, I hope I'll say this over appropriately, I heard years ago from Rav Lopiansky a very interesting idea that stuck with me, that in a way, Yitzchak's role in life was a very unique one, because Yitzchak's role required him not to really originate, but to keep on going the same path that Avram had laid out. And in a sense, it's exciting, it's invigorating, it's energizing to blaze one's own path. But to follow the path laid out by another, where it's not my innovation, it's not my creativity, it's actually very challenging. And this fight that Yitzchak fought for the wells really represents his life mission. That was Avraham shone a new light on the world, and Yitzchak's role was to continue to shine the light. And so this challenge is something that I think many of us can relate to in our own circumstances, and in a sense encapsulates the mission of Yitzchak's life. I hope I said the idea over appropriately. I think it's a very powerful idea. But what I'd like to reflect on for a few more minutes this morning is a very nice thought from the Chafetz Chaim. And the Chafetz Chaim says, look at this experience that Yitzchak has with the wells. Look at this experience. He just wants to dig the wells. And wherever he turns, he has problems. He works on one well, and there are great problems. And the problems are so present to Yitzchak that that's the name that he calls the well, because that's what the well represents to him. And then he digs a second well. And Ribono Shel Olam, there are more problems. And so he gives another name that represent the problems and the challenges that he has of his neighbors with dealing with these wells. And surely Yitzchak would have been justified to say to himself, what do I need these wells for? This is not going. But he tries again. And when he tries again, it goes well. And Yitzchak sees this as a sign of God's blessing. And of course, one could very well pose the question, and it would be a fair question, if God wanted him to succeed with the wells, why was it so difficult at the beginning? And if God didn't want him to succeed at the wells, why did he ultimately bring him success? And the Chafetz Chaim says we learn from here an essential life lesson. That so many times there are projects, there are issues, there are matters that we do need to strive for, and God wants us to strive for. And because God wants to bring something great out of us, we only merit that divine assistance once we have challenges and maybe even failures. And if we keep on pushing and keep on pushing and keep on pushing, we ultimately merit success. And I think it's a very important thing for us to think about. We all have things we're struggling with. But even besides the things we're struggling with, we all have ideas. We all have thoughts. Maybe we should try this. Maybe we should try that in our own lives, on the communal scale. And many, many times we try it. We try it once. We try it twice. And if it doesn't go, we shrug our shoulders. And we say, okay, it's obviously not meant to be. The idea of keeping on and pushing and pushing and pushing is really a very special thing. And by the way, as one pushes, seeing it as, if I keep on trying, perhaps I'll merit divine assistance. And then when the success comes, it's not, oh, I finally did it. It's, oh, God finally shone his light of success upon me. That's a real life lesson. And in a sense, if we're thinking about that idea, we can probably relate the most of all the patriarchs. We can probably relate the most to Yitzchak. Avraham was an absolute star. No pun intended about blessings for offspring. Avraham was an absolute star, and the world was, there were great challenges for Avraham, but great successes. Avraham changed the world. To a certain extent, we look at Avraham and we say, that's amazing. We're honored to descend from this person, but whoa, that is not me. Yaakov had so many challenges, and by the way, so many challenges that he really had very little choice about whether or not he would deal with them or not. He has to deal with Lavan. What's he going to do? What's the alternative? What, go back to Esav? He has to deal with Lavan. He has to deal with having lost his son Yosef and not knowing what happened to him and thinking that he passed. He has to deal with that. And he deals with these things in a tremendous way, and so many other things in between. And he deals with these things in a tremendous way, but he has to do it. Unfortunately, I think many of us can relate to the struggle of Yaakov Avinu. But Yitzchak is a different task. Yitzchak is the task that maybe he'll just stop. You know, we say that Avram and Sarah together gathered the nefesh asher asu v'charan, the souls that they literally made in Haran, but it means the people that they inspired. It seems that over time they kind of fell by the wayside, those people, after Avram and Sarah were no longer in the mix. Can you imagine someone in Yitzchak's position saying, why am I even doing this anymore? Why am I living this unique life? It's not working for me the same way it worked for my parents. Certainly, personally, it was remarkable for him, but I'm not changing the world. I'm just not. Certainly not in an evident manner. But he kept on. And the idea of the wells, this idea that the Chafetz Chaim lays out of the wells, and it fits with the idea from Rav Lapiansky as well, is that this is what he saw as his task, and he kept on trying. And as he kept on trying, despite failure, he ultimately met great success. And the truth is, when you think about it, the very perplexing story of the blessings at the end of the Parsha fits with this very well. Yitzchak had a goal. Yitzchak felt very strongly that it was his responsibility as a patriarch to give a very meaningful blessing to the torchbearer for the next generation. And it was important to him to do that. And he thought that the correct recipient of that blessing was Esav. And God saw to it that Rivka would know what he was planning to do, and she would be able to involve Yaakov. And clearly, Rivka had a different plan. And clearly, God wanted to enable Rivka to follow through on that plan. But what about Yitzchak? Yitzchak clearly valued the idea of passing the bracha on to the right person for the next generation. And he erred. He made an honest mistake as to who the appropriate recipient of that blessing should be. But what happened? God made it that he ultimately gave the blessing to the right person. Isn't that an interesting thing to think about? Isn't that striking? Doesn't that teach us something? Doesn't that teach us that he tried and he put forth effort, and though it wasn't in the way that he thought it was supposed to be, God blessed his efforts. And God saw to it that his blessing went to the correct person. Obviously, our struggles are not the struggles of Yitzchak Avinu. Obviously, our struggles are a little bit more down to earth than that. But the lesson of the digging of the wells and ultimately feeling that one met with great assistance from God after all the efforts and all the frustrations is, I think, a very appropriate thing to reflect on. Have a wonderful Shabbos.